Hello and welcome to The Top Story, the podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Siju. Coming up in this edition, the Israeli government has approved a plan to expand settlements in the Golan Heights, aiming to double the Israeli population in a Syrian territory currently occupied by Israel. Winter weather advisories are in place in at least 23 states in the United States as heavy rain and snow sweep across the nation. And Spain has promised to legalize nearly 1 million undocumented migrants for the next 3 years. We begin in the Middle East. The Israeli government has approved a plan to expand settlements in the Golan Heights, a Syrian territory currently occupied by Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said the plan aims to double the Israeli population in the Golan Heights. Israel captured part of Golan during the 1967 war and annexed it despite international condemnation. Following the downfall of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government on December the 8th, Israel seized the UN-monitored buffer zone, a demilitarized area established in 1974 under a ceasefire agreement between the two countries. Meanwhile, Israel has launched more airstrikes on Syrian army assets across the country. Gulf countries including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar have denounced the Israeli decision to expand settlements in the Golan Heights. Jonathan Regev reports.
Israel is, for the moment, intending to stay both on the buffer zone and on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, the Syrian summit, which Israeli forces took over. And the defense minister, Israel Katz, told the forces to stay there at least until the end of winter. So how long will the forces stay there? It will be quite some time, and it will be interesting to see what the Trump administration says regarding that. And if we speak of the Trump administration, it was former President Donald Trump who acknowledged that the Golan Heights are a part of an integral part of Israel. This is something that only Israel and the United States agree to. According to every other country, the Golan Heights are in occupied territory. But despite that, Israel announced that it will fortify and increase the number of Israeli communities on the Golan Heights, more Israeli residents, meaning as far as Israel is concerned, this is an integral part of the state of Israel, which Israel does not intend to withdraw from, and more Israeli residents, according to this decision, are planned to eventually relocate there.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting. It's been over a week since the fall of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. Steps underway to resume normal life amid continued Israeli hostility. Philip Crowther with the Associated Press has more from Damascus.
Those Israeli airstrikes are a daily occurrence. We hear them. We hear the fighter jets overhead as well. Hundreds of military targets have been hit by Israel since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. But you might be surprised to hear that it's not a big topic of discussion here in Damascus. The euphoria, the enthusiasm is simply too big. It's only been a week, after all, since this new Syria appeared, since Bashar al-Assad left the country for Moscow. It brought to an end over 50 years of the Assad dynasty. It brought to an end also 13 years of civil war that made Damascus a very, very dangerous place to be. And we saw something that truly was unthinkable a week ago. In unison, we saw men, and in fact largely women, walking down the street in their thousands toward the square, Umayyad Square, sporting those new flags of the revolution or of the opposition here in Syria. Those flags, by the way, the green, white and black bars and the red stars, they are ubiquitous now here in the capital. They are for sale in all shapes and sizes in the old town of Damascus. But there are signs of what came before, because plastered on the walls of the old town and also of Damascus's emblematic mosque are the posters with photos of the missing men, largely, who are believed to have been in the prisons of Bashar al-Assad and who have not been found since the overthrow of the Syrian president. Family members still wanting to find those people or find at least some trace of where they were. They are calling for an international investigation.
That was Philip Crowther reporting from Damascus. More than 13 million Syrian people have been displaced from homes and communities over the past decade. While most of the refugees have sought safe neighbouring countries, others are resettled farther away, especially in Europe. Erad Vermark spoke to Shabia Mantou, the global spokesperson of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, about the situation in Syria and the impact of European countries' suspension of asylum applications on Syrian refugees.
Shabia, it's been quite a week. I think none of us expected what we've seen over the past few days. 13 years over in 10 days. 13 million people, 7.5 internally displaced. But I'd like to talk to you about the roughly 6.5 or so who have found refuge in neighboring countries and abroad. What work you guys have done since then?
We're talking about a very depressed economic situation with people struggling to have livelihoods, struggling to receive support. 90% of people are dependent or rely on some form of humanitarian assistance. We also saw the devastating earthquake in Syria and Turkey in the region last year as well, which compounded humanitarian needs. We have a brutal winter in which many Syrians and people who have displaced have been facing. And most recently also there have been many Syrians affected in Lebanon, for instance, which is one of the major host country for Syrians, by the hostilities there and the relentless bombardment that they've been facing as a result of the situation and Israeli airstrikes. Events unfold very rapidly over the past few days. It does represent an opportunity, a possibility to resolve quite a substantial part of the mass displacement crisis that we're seeing, but it's still very early days. So refugees and those that are displaced are still watching events unfold. Some are very hopeful and eager to return home. Others are a bit hesitant. The dust needs to settle.
Within 24 hours, these European countries that host some refugees immediately suspending those asylum claims. How do those recent discussions impact the rights of Syrian refugees?
From what we've seen and the reporting that we've seen, the decisions that we've seen are about suspending the decision-making on asylum claims until the situation is stabilized or that a better picture can be ascertained in terms of the human rights and security situation. But what we've been very clear about saying is that even though the decision-making is going to be postponed or suspended for the time being, that asylum seekers will still and should retain the same rights as other asylum seekers, and that any Syrian or any person in need of international protection is able to lodge their claim for that and then eventually have their case heard. In the meantime, as for the Syrians outside, registered refugees and others who are receiving protection have to retain that protection and there should absolutely be no returns or forcible returns which would contravene or violate the principle of non-refoulement under international law. So that is what we're clear about. We have to bear in mind the situation will vary from individual to individual, and that's why it's really important that asylum claims and asylum processes, they're done on an individual basis.
That was Shabia Mantou, the global spokesperson of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees on the situation in Syria. Turning to North America, winter weather advisories are in place in at least 23 U.S. states as heavy rain and snow sweep across the country. A tornado thrashed a town near San Francisco, California. Forecasters warn that travel conditions could range from difficult to impossible throughout the holiday season. Paul Pimuputin reports.
At least 4 people were injured after a tornado struck Northern California on Saturday afternoon. Touching down about 90 kilometers south of San Francisco, the twister that brought heavy rain overturned cars and downed power lines. Authorities had sent early morning tornado alerts to San Francisco residents, the first ever for the city. The tornado comes just weeks after the Pacific Northwest was struck by a bomb cyclone weather system that pummeled Washington and California. A cold front is currently sweeping across the United States, dumping various precipitation from heavy rain to sleet as well as snow. Winter weather warnings are in place in 23 states. Forecasters warn that the winter weather is creating treacherous conditions and could impact travel plans as Americans head into the holiday week. The storm system that's traveling across the continental U.S. is expected to bring heavy rain and possibly snow. Winter storm advisories are in effect in parts of Pennsylvania, Maryland and West Virginia.
That was Popham Putin on the winter weather advisories in the US. In Europe, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has promised to legalize nearly 1 million undocumented migrants, announcing the legislation of 300,000 undocumented migrants a year for the next 3 years. Experts have welcomed the Spanish migrant visa initiative, saying it resolves some of the challenges that contribute to increased illegal immigration. Joy Karuki-Juma has more.
The search for greener pastures in European countries has seen hundreds of African migrants die at sea. The new Spanish visa, referred to as a route permit, is now available to individuals who have held a residence permit for 2 years, but whose validity has expired. Suleiman Diallo, a migration expert, outlined how the new system will work.
Today, anyone who goes to Spain as part of circular migration has the possibility of having a 1-year residence permit, working during the harvest season, receiving their money and returning to the country. When the young African returns next season, his contract and visa are renewed and he leaves for another harvest season. After 2 years, if the young migrant respects his commitment, in the 3rd year, he is issued a permanent residence permit.
The Canary Islands has recorded a considerable increase in the number of migrants arriving from Mali, Morocco and Senegal. Government figures show migrants entering the islands between 1st January and 30th November reached 41,425, compared to 39,910 recorded in 2023. Young Senegalese people living in Dakar have welcomed the Spanish initiative.
Last September, I tried to immigrate. We were almost 200 people. We couldn't get to Spain. Spain's plan to help young migrants is good. I hope it's followed and supported. Our authorities should stop people leaving for Europe on secret boats.
As you know, living conditions here are very difficult, which is why young people choose to immigrate. We see what happens here every day. We therefore welcome this initiative by the Spanish government. But we need our states to support us so that our children, our young brothers and sisters can stay in our countries.
Spain plans to offer visas to 300,000 undocumented migrants every year for the next 3 years to allow them remain in the country to study and work. The country's migration minister says young workers' taxes are needed to fund the pensions and healthcare of its aging population. One Senegalese economist believes the initiative is more in Spain's favor.
This type of intelligent immigration responds to an economic demand from Spanish farmers who consider these young Africans to be a highly dynamic workforce. They are able to work for more than 10 hours in the field, lifting boxes. Many fields in Spain lack technology, so they need a lot of manual work. Spain is getting cheap African workers. You know, at the moment, our economies are not yet able to meet the needs of these young Africans. To prevent these young people from dying at sea, Africa must develop its economy in a way and keep these children there.
The Spanish work permit allows for a change in employer in the event of abuse or other causes that would prevent the holder from working. The initiative is expected to come into force in the form of a royal decree in May 2025.
That was Joy Karuki-Juma reporting. Finally, in Africa, South Sudan has registered over 6,000 cases of cholera, including over 60 deaths. The government is urging the public to maintain hygiene as it looks for more vaccines. Patrick Oyer has more from Juba.
The government says the majority of the cholera cases are in states that border Sudan. There are 4 of South Sudan states that border Sudan. Among those, oil-rich Unity State has the highest number of people infected with cholera. Local authorities say more than 800 people are affected in Unity State. A health center run by Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, in Hoop Corner in Unity State is full with some patients now being treated while sleeping on the floor of the health facility.
Efforts are underway to rescue the situation. The Ministry of Health have asked for vaccines The quantity received so far is very small, and they have sent it to Rang so that the people who are there are rescued. Efforts are underway to get more vaccines for the other areas.
The cholera outbreak was first declared in Rang, a town near South Sudan border in October. The town is used as a transit center for those fleeing violence in Sudan. Now the disease has spread to other parts of the country, including in the capital, Juba. The government says the disease is spreading rapidly because of floods and poor sanitation, especially among the internally displaced people and refugees. Aid agencies are calling for better coordination among those in the health sector to try and contain the spread of the disease.
That was Patrick Oyer reporting from Juba. Now, recapping the headlines, the Israeli government has approved a plan to expand settlements in the Golan Heights, aiming to double the Israeli population there. Winter weather advisories are in place in at least 23 states in the US as heavy rain and snow sweep across the nation. And Spain has promised to legalize nearly 1 million undocumented migrants for the next 3 years. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can also subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We would welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thanks for listening.